Welcome to God of Run. This is Will Sanchez. Thank you for tuning in. My special guest is Peter Roth. Peter has been a photographer, a film producer, an author, and he was at the beginning of the New York City Roadrunners Club. Peter has enjoyed the freedom of doing many things, and he has lived many lives. I am honored to have Peter as a guest. Peter, we met recently at Roadrunners at the Run Center when Gary Corbett did this beautiful presentation on his dad, Ted Corbett.
Right, and we had a panel.
And you were one of the panelists. And I was totally fascinated by it. I was with friends. And I loved the way Gary did it. He was superb. And he didn't introduce the panel. So among us, we were saying, who's that? And the only person I knew in the panel, to be honest, was Gary Murky, primarily because he's been on the show. And I was fascinated by your presentation or your presence on the panel because the way Gary did it was, it turns out you were the last to speak. And I was sitting there wondering if you were ever going to get to speak because the audience was encouraged to participate. And then you started. And one of the things that struck me, I want to use a term from Star Wars, force sensitive, that not necessarily that you're able to pick up rocks, but you're able to pick up spirits in your current work as a healer. So before we go into your healing work, which is totally fascinating, let's go back to the beginning. Tell us where you were born and something about your childhood.
Well, I'm from New York City, and I grew up in Westchester also. I came back into New York, into Manhattan 50 years ago, and on the Upper West Side. I'm still on the Upper West Side. And I grew up with a father who was a professional athlete. He was a soccer player. He played in the Polo Grounds for the New York Hakoas. And so I grew up with soccer, but also as kids in those days, we really had baseball and football and a little bit of basketball. It wasn't, it was very basic back in the 40s and early 50s. And so I was trying to be an athlete like my father, but I failed in so many sports and I felt horrible. So what happened was that I was a short, fat kid and non-athletic that I knew of, even though I was trying to be. And then just before my senior year, that summer, I decided to get the lead out, and I ran all summer. And I ended up getting taller. For some reason, that was where I shot up in height, and thinner. And I got back to school, and they started a cross-country team in high school, and did very well. We even won the state championship. So I guess I found my athletic role in life. And my father had come out to one of the meets where I did really well. And I was so proud of myself that I'd finally, made my father proud of me as an athlete. And then a few months later, he suddenly died of a heart attack. And so the way I keep my father close is through running.
Wow. I guess he died very young then, in his 50s?
50.
Oh, my gosh.
50, yes. And without any warning, he was supposedly healthy guy. So running has been a deep part of my life because it was what my father was proudest of me for. And so I made a life of it. And there were many years when I moved into New York to the Upper West Side, I started running in Riverside Park 50 years ago. And for 6 years, I never saw another runner. In the early 70s, yes.
Okay.
And at that time, people just thought there was something wrong with me that I had to run so much. And then finally, I went over to Central Park. For a number of reasons, I diversified a bit and found other runners, and I began to even be involved with the West Side Y. I started teaching exercise classes there, and that's where Roadrunners was stationed. It was just a little room in the back behind the gym, and Joe Kleinerman and Fred LeBeau were the only two people around, and people came and went. And Bob Glover was involved with the West Side Y at that time, and he and I became friends. And so he and I both became very interested in New York Roadrunners at that point and helped get it going.
That's right. That's right. So what year did the first inauguration of Roadrunners occur?
Well, Roadrunners started in the late 50s with Ted Corbett and Joe Kleinerman and a bunch of other people.
Ted Corbett was elected the first president
right,
of Roadrunners.
Right. And then Fred came in a dozen years later.
Fred LeBeau,
right. And so he was very involved at that point. And as we all know, Fred was quite a character, very charismatic, and really pushed a lot of buttons in people and made things happen.
We should mention he's highlighted in the film Run for Your Life.
Well, the film is a lot about Fred, and because I was so much a part of the creation of the first 5-borough marathon, and worked so closely with Fred, and I became the treasurer and the finance director for many years for Roadrunners, and I even signed the corporate papers to launch the corporation. Before that, it was just a club, and so it was very dynamic and dramatic in those days, experimenting with creating a running boom that we had no idea we were creating, other than just want to get more and more people running.
Yes.
And Fred was pretty wild and crazy, and no holds barred. Fred pushed everybody's buttons in very many ways that wouldn't be appreciated nowadays, because he wasn't. He was from the garment industry,
right?
And it was kind of a corrupt industry.
Well, I loved it in the film. They call him a rip-off artist because he took the design and created cheaper versions of it.
Well, he told everybody stories. You know, he told the press that we had lots of sponsors and runners. Told the runners, you know, we had lots of press and sponsors, and told, you know, everybody was told that everything else was great, and yet nothing really was behind it other than Fred's stories about it.
Interesting. It sounds like The Producers, you know,
right.
that
film
where, you know, he tells everything, but at the end, got a smash hit. So here, at the end, you got a smash hit.
Yes, Fred's fake numbers, all of them came true.
Interesting. Maybe he was force sensitive. He could see into the future a bit that nobody else could see.
He was a genius in ways that I don't even think he understood, but he was driven to be the force. And now the recent film Free to Run even says that New York is the home of the international running boom.
Let's talk a little bit about Ted Corbett. You worked with him, and he was more than just a runner. I mean, he's known as the father of the ultramarathon. In fact, I read recently, he coined the word ultramarathon,
right,
which is any race longer than 26.2.
Well, Ted was a very strange person because he was brilliant, never stopped experimenting and learning with so many different things. Because not only was he this ultra-marathoner, I remember when Gary was born, not that I was there at the time, but years later, I mean, Ted said, oh, he feels bad because he missed Gary's birth. I said, why do you miss it? He said, well, he was out doing a 30-mile workout.
And Gary came prematurely?
Well, he wasn't expected that day, I guess.
Okay. And by training, I think he was a physical therapist.
Right. Ted was actually the chief physical therapist for a major hospital and was very well known in the physical therapy world. I remember a cousin of mine who became a physical therapist studied with him. And so Ted was a big shot in that industry.
In fact, Gary, his son, says that although he had many, many achievements as a runner, he feels that his greatest contribution was in the field of physical therapy.
That's how important that was. And yet, look how we feel about Ted in the running world.
But what was your involvement? Were you a teacher of his or mentor?
Yes. And he was a mentor of mine, too. Ted and I were board members of Road Runners and Runners. And there was a time where we just knew each other in that way. And over time, we became conversational about the work we were doing with athletes, with their bodies, helping them heal, fixing them, because that's what I was doing also in my own way. And I'm not a traditional practitioner. I'm out of the box. So I work with runners and other people, finding answers that no one else can find.
You're doing that right now as well.
Yes.
Now, when you say out of the box, that means you didn't go necessarily to medical school. What's your training?
I studied in a lot of medical systems and trained with I sought out the doctors who were advanced practitioners, who were doing things that no one else was doing. And for some reason, they all wanted to take me under their wing and teach me what they were doing. And so I learned so much. And I'm also, let's call it spiritually oriented. I'm very intuitive. I know things that are, it's hard to explain this, but everything is in the universe. All of our thoughts, everything is retained in the universal computer, which I call it. Mm-hmm. So I learned to tap into that. And so I learned that I can hear information about people's lives that no one would know. Mm-hmm. And somehow I know it. And mm-hmm. I can tell people what I know, and they go, "How do you know that? Nobody knows that." And then I can also feel into people's bodies remotely and see what's going on. For instance, one time, one of my clients who actually is proud to be a client of mine and tells people about it is Dina Castor. And she's been a client of mine for maybe 17 years.
The world-class marathoner.
Right. So I've helped her get through many problems. I'm her troubleshooter. So when she's stuck, she'll call me and ask me to help. But I remember one time where I didn't get a call from her. I just saw news that she had dropped out of I think it was a Boulder run, mm-hmm. Out in Colorado. And they said she dropped out because she had a foot injury. And so I remotely felt what was going on with her body. And no, it was not a foot injury. It was an ankle injury. It must have twisted an ankle or something. So I remember I called her coach, Terrence Mahan, who was a student of mine. And so we could talk a lot. And I said, "Terrence, she dropped out because of a foot problem, but it's not. It's an ankle problem." And he said, "Yeah, well, that's the problem. She sprained her ankle." And then when she came back from the Beijing Marathon and had a stress fracture in the marathon and had to drop out, she came home and I spoke on the phone with her and I said, "Dina, the only thing I can see wrong with you is the third metatarsal in your right foot."
Now, this is over the phone, not necessarily a physical.
No, right. And she said, "Yeah, that's where the stress fracture was." So, see, I can feel all kinds of things going on in people's bodies.
That's why I refer to you as force sensitive. Are you a Star Wars follower?
I appreciate all of that. actually, I have a school, the Heart River Center for Intuitive Healing, and I've had thousands of students over the years. And Ted has come to my classes, or had come to my classes. So he was very fascinated with what I do. He saw the results I was getting, and he wanted it for himself.
Well, to learn what you were doing, or the
How
the
I was doing
byproduct?
it too, because I was discovering things going on in the body that other people wouldn't know about.
Right. You mentioned that. I'm fascinated by that. I call it force sensitive, but I think I've seen it in other people. But they use their talents in a different way. For example, I don't know if you know the magician Oz Perman. He's a magical marathoner. He's done 2:25 at the Hartford Marathon. He does ultra marathons. He's done Badwater, finished in the top 10. But he also has this other career as a magician, as a mentalist. And he too, by lifting his hands, can bring things out of you that's shocking, magical.
See, the thing is that these things are very real, but the public is not aware of it because we're conditioned not to even believe in it. And it takes people who are very bold, like me and this other man, and many others who are gifted in ways that we just can't help but living those lives.
But you probably get a lot of resistance from let's call it the mainstream
Of course.
medical community.
Oh my gosh.
You probably
I have so many
are
stories,
fake
right?
or phony. Well, how do you handle when they call you that?
Because I'm not trying to prove anything to them. I want results from the people I work with, and that's all that counts. And so it's word of mouth. People come to see me or call me, remotely, because they are seeking solutions that no one else has.
Seeking relief from their pain, whether it be physical
or psychological. And that's another thing, is that I can read into people's psyches. And so, for instance, there was this one world-class woman, 1,500-meter runner, and she found that when she surged in races, her lungs wouldn't support her. She could surge in practice and be fine, but when it really counted, she would wither. And she called me and wanted to know what the answer was. And I said, well, the answer is with your father. And I said, you need to rescript yourself about how you're running in relationship to your father. And she said, what does that mean? I said, well, let's talk about your father, because there's a weakness in him that you're representing in your running. And she said, yes, he, of the two parents, he was the weaker player. The mother dominated, and even her. I mean, she didn't have a good relationship with her mother, but her father came to all her races, really was devoted to her. But he was pushed around a lot by her mother. And I said, well, what it is that you're running with the weak side of your father. But let's rescript that, and let's run with your father's love for you. Let's just, understand this as his love for you is so great that it helps you win. And from that moment on, she never had a problem again.
Interesting. That insight made all the difference in the world for her.
Yes.
So you're part, not only a sports psychologist, before there even was a sports psychologist back in Fred LeBeau's day.
See, I didn't have to ask her about her parents until I already told her this is what the problem, that there is this problem with your father.
And that came from your intuition.
Yes.
Or what would you call your intuition?
Right. And so I've done that with, for many, many, many years with so many people. Before
I lose my train of thought, ordinary runner, you probably heard of this. This runner can't run over bridges for some reason. Yeah, they stop. They have to be carried over or they have to do something. An ordinary runner, not a champion
Right.
runner, not Dina Caster, can you help that person?
Yes, actually, there was a client I had who couldn't drive over bridges. And I worked on him, and he called me a few days later and said, I'm driving over all the bridges I can find.
Oh, after you had,
Yeah,
well, how
after I
long a
helped
treatment
him.
was that?
Well, it was just a re-scripting that we did about it.
Okay.
It's, just talking to the brain in a way that tells it how to reframe itself.
Obviously, your methodology would be the same for a runner that can't run over bridges.
Yeah.
You would re-script them somehow.
Right. But I want to tell you a story that's not about runners, but just to explain how this can also work in strange ways. A woman came to me with her 4-year-old daughter who wasn't producing red blood cells. And she had been to the hospital and they could do transfusions, but she wasn't producing her own red blood cells. And she came to me, what can we do? And what do I know? But I asked higher consciousness, and I was told that she should take the daughter home with her husband. He holds her in his arms for 3 hours while she watches her mother be active around the house, be doing chores and being very functional, productive, while she's being safely held by her father. And for some reason, that scenario was what she needed. And they called me right after that and she said, yes, her red blood cells kicked right back in after that.
That is amazing. That's amazing. It reminded me, I guess, with the story about, you probably read it too, about these premature babies, twins. They were in separate incubators. One was
Right.
doing extremely well, the other one was dying.
Right, if they brought them together, yes.
And the one that was doing so well somehow was able to help her sister
Right.
recover.
That means a lot to me because I have a twin brother who's also a runner. And we have a lot of stories to tell about our relationship. That is wonderful.
That is a fascinating career you've had. I mean, I mentioned you've been a photographer, you were a film producer, I think it was called On the Edge.
Right, On the Edge.
With Bruce Dern.
Was a film we made out in California of running over Mount Tamalpais. It was just a made-up race that we did for the film, and Bruce was one of the runners in the race.
Actually, in real life, he was also quite a bit of a good runner.
He was even
reading.
an ultra-marathoner.
Yes. Wow, it's fascinating that all the interconnections in your life. But the common thread seems to be you're helping people. Your need, or I guess it's more than a need, because you got this gift. And does it overwhelm you at times?
It fascinates me. It's like, how can, humans aren't supposed to be like this. But once you're open to the universe, and so many people are, and I've taught so many people to become this way too, who, it's just, you have to just understand that you can be. Every human can be like this.
I'm sorry, but I have to go back to Star Wars because if you haven't seen the Last Jedi, you must, because one of the themes in The Last Jedi is that the Force is not just in one family. It's not just one
with
tribe.
everybody.
Everybody has that gift.
Right.
How they develop it, it's a bit of a mystery.
Well, it's only really, it's available to everybody, but we're not all designed to be interested in it. And so those who are watching the show think, oh, I would love to be like that. Well, guess what? You can be.
You could be force sensitive in your way.
But you want to dedicate yourself to become that. So it's really about training. And it's not about meditating a lot for it. It's really about finding the vibes, the alpha state, theta state, or brainwave states that open you up more. And you learn to tune into them. And you can do it just like that if you know how. And so I teach people how to do that at Heart River Center. And
this is in Manhattan?
Yes, that's where my office is, but most of my classes are online.
Okay.
So I have a lot of classes that people can join.
People can learn this online.
So many things that, yeah. And so Ted Corbett just loved all this, you can imagine, and wanted to open it up for himself.
Yes. How far did he get along with that? You know, how old?
He was pretty happy doing it with me, and, you know, he kept on experimenting with it.
You know, one of the people that was at this presentation was Joe Perez, and he spoke, and he was up front, so we could see him in the back, and he was a rod. I mean, wow, he really had great posture.
Well, he had been a weightlifter. He wasn't a runner. He was a weightlifter. And at this point in his life, he's my age, so we're past our prime, so he doesn't look like a weightlifter anymore. He's a wonderful guy, cerebral palsy. And one time, actually, I spoke to him. He was a good friend of Ted Corbett's. And I said, Joe, I know why you have cerebral palsy. And he said, tell me. I said, because I can see a great-grandfather of yours was a mass murderer, and you've inherited his genes. And so that's why you have cerebral palsy, because karmically, you know, you're dealing with that. And he said, wow. He said, yes, that relative of mine was a famous killer. And I've been told many times in this life, I'm here to stop the killing.
That's quite amazing. But let's go back to the, like I said, we're going to scratch the surface. I want to go back to the marathon. So you were there for the first 5 borough marathon. Was there a special shirt I think you can show us about it?
Oh, yes. Well, the first 5 borough marathon, 1976. And then I was so involved with the organization that I was helping them design, or us design shirts. And you know, I helped design the, you know, training shirts. This was for the 1977 marathon, and we always had shirts.
Yeah.
And Fred LeBeau made sure, because he knew what runners wanted. He really
he was in the
was a
clothes
master
business.
of that. And Fred always wore these hats. This is from 1977 marathon, and Fred used to run around the city in these hats all the time, and this was popular in that day.
I wonder why it's not as popular nowadays.
I don't know, but
famous marathoners wore hats. Joan Benet Samuelson wore a painter's hat.
Yeah, right. And actually,
Dick Beardsley.
I remember the Yonkers Marathon going up Central Avenue in my neighborhood that I grew up in, just north of Yonkers, and we used to watch the runners, and they wanted us, and so it was hot. I remember one race was really hot, and they didn't have these hats then, so they wore handkerchiefs with the corners knotted, and that was their hat. And they wanted us to throw water on them, and we thought, oh my gosh, we can throw water on people and not get in trouble? So
this is before official water stations.
well, yeah, this was in the 50s, before the running booms.
Peter, I remember during the presentation that I found fascinating. You really were a sports psychologist back then, before there really was such a thing as sports psychologists. One of the things you mentioned was visualization. So something that's very common now to help both athletes and non-athletes to visualize their success. Tell us that story.
I've always been a pioneer in my life, a bold one. So I was invited to this panel at the Barcelona Marathon, and it was all psychologists who were supposedly sports psychologists. And I was on the panel, and I spoke about visualization, that if we visualize the race and we see ourselves running in it ahead of time, and I took the audience through a marathon in their heads while they were sitting there being victorious at the end. And I said, this is a wonderful way to use sports psychology to train for a marathon. And all the other panel members were actually nasty to me about it, vocally, and said, this is stupid, this couldn't work, it's a waste of time. Why bother everybody with something like, what does visualization do for anybody? And it was humiliating to be
How old were you at
attacked.
that time?
Late 30s.
Okay.
You know, so I'm, you know, so I'm, some years later, the director of that panel, the guy who put it together, came to New York and he sought me out to apologize. And he said, "You were right."
Did you ever meet Doug Stern?
Doug was a close friend of mine.
Well, he used it extremely well.
Yes, yes.
And the way he used it was to visualize a swimmer that you admire. And then just imagine you're doing that stroke in the water. And then just go for it.
Yes.
And for many, it worked. For me, not so much.
Doug was amazing, and that's why we were such good friends, because he really understood the mechanics of becoming a champion.
Well, Doug Stern was a real New Yorker. He took no prisoners, no gruff. He was definitely an alpha.
I helped him create the deep water running program.
Really?
Yes.
That's amazing. You've been involved in so many things. They should have a movie about you one of these
Well,
days.
actually, I'm starting to write a book about my life, because there's so many things, stories I have. I'm also a third-degree black belt in karate, and I was in national competition. I once did a nightclub act one summer, breaking boards. The act before me was Tiny Tim. The act after me was Jose Feliciano. I would hang out backstage with Richard Pryor. I don't know. But I also had many stories of being attacked in New York on the streets and using my karate. And
Because you were running and they thought you were running away?
No, nothing to do with running, actually, just in situations with muggers, mostly, about muggers.
Okay,
But I've been
okay.
in other situations where I've had to,
Defend yourself.
yeah. And, but not because I'm this big, tough guy. I'm not. I
You know how to
learned, I
move your
learned
hands
how
and
to,
move your
no,
body.
it's not even my hands. It's just, it's magic. It's learning to use it, magically. When you see, people who really know martial arts, there's a finesse to it. And I studied with Peter Urban, who was an incredible master. And this goes way back. This is in the 60s. And it was wonderful. He just brought out the best. We all had a lot of national title holders in our classes, and because he was so amazing. So I really understood how to live a martial arts life, so that you just know how to strategize yourself in situations.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I know so many people would be so fascinated to meet you. Do you know Danny Dwyer?
No, I don't.
He's the founder of Chi Running, Chi Walking, and the movements you make is the movements that he does when he tries to
I know,
teach people, how to move their bodies.
Yeah, when you understand flow, this is chi, or in Japanese we called it ki. And when you understand the flow, then you use it. And so that's maybe part also of why I can work with remote energy and feel and find the flow, even, third dimensionally, fourth dimensionally, fifth dimensionally, whatever, to understand how energy works in all of our lives, in all of our bodies, in our psyches, and to help us live better.
Yes, yes. You are a gift to humanity.
Thank you.
And it's good to know there's more than one of you. Although some of these people use those skills in different ways in entertainment. One of the things that you do reminded me of the work astrologers do. They're by just knowing exactly the time and date and place of birth, they can tell you things that you thought, how do they know?
Well, there's actually another system that I use in that way, based on people's birth data, so we know where the planets are in the sky when they were born, and that's called the Human Design System. And it's not astrology. It actually uses their birth data to align them with the planets, with the Chinese the hexagrams of the Chinese I Ching. And it also then positions the hexagrams in the chakra system of the body, the energy vortexes. And so it helps understand our personalities in even deeper ways than astrology. My wife is an astrologer, and she says that human design is astrology on steroids. And so I love to help people understand the mechanics of their personalities. And it's amazing how deep and rich the explanation is for each person so they can be better at being themselves.
Wow. Now, if a viewer listening to this, wow, how can I get my human design chart? Could they contact you?
Oh, sure.
And
for anything, you know, I tell people, please learn how to use me because I love to be used.
Besides the chart, there's the reading. That's where, where you analyze it and you talk to the phone, probably over the phone.
Yeah, I'm a certified analyst of it.
Okay.
And so I can speak with people either in person or I like to use Zoom, which is kind of like Skype.
Yeah.
And so I can be on the screen with people and help them.
Fascinating. That you can combine old school with new technology.
I love it. You know, it's just fun. Any way that I can help people.
Okay. I can feel that you want to help. So in closing, what is it that you want to say that we haven't talked about?
You know, I'd love to teach people about life, what really counts. Who are we? You know, why are we here? And that's why human design is important. That's why I can read people's energy fields and go back in time with them, not with them, but for them, to their childhood. I can see what their parents were doing, how they were treating their children, and then explain why their patterns in their life are such that they make the choices now that they are making.
My final thought, would a religious person welcome your kind of help, or would they feel, rather than being complimentary, it's something else?
But let's just say that spirituality is growing in popularity in this world, beyond religion. We're understanding that we're all of spirit. And so we can use religion to understand that, but a lot of religions are dogmatic and they say it has to be our way or the highway.
Yeah.
You know, I don't care what religion you are, if you're not ours, then you're in big trouble. And so those people are hard to talk to anyway.
Yeah.
So whatever, you know, if people are really religiously inclined and they're not interested in anything outside of the rules of their own religion, I'm not, it's okay, they can do that.
Okay. Well, I can imagine that a lot of people don't know that there's another way that they can be helped.
Right.
Because, I mean, I sort of was aware of it, but not when I saw you on stage. And I think it helped that you were the last to speak, because people can tell there's something special about that guy. I can't put my finger on it, but once we heard you speak, we said, aha.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. As I know that I'm unique, you know, and it's hard to be unique because it's not accepted by everybody.
I know.
I've had a lot of trouble in my life with people who really not liked how universal I might be. And also bold and pioneer of a lot of things. So I've had a lot of, you know, naysayers in my life over the years. So people don't realize how much I appreciate being appreciated. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure too. Will, I'm so glad to know you.
Talk about the shoe market at that time.
The shoe market at that time. The shoe business is gone. It's all Amazon. Anyway, I told my wife, my current wife, you might know her. She's an think it's 56 years. But I wasn't coming tonight because Monday she had a new knee. I was her caregiver. I thought this was a great excuse. Nobody's really interested in the old times. What the heck? Nobody cares about the old times. I made a mistake again. So many great friends just to see you. I'm just so delighted to be here. So we did the business for about 35 years. We got tired. We had so many stores. Jane and I were running the whole thing. We retired. My daughter bought a store last year, our original store. I got a job. I'm happier than anything. How do you tell Michael and Peter? Nobody cares about the old time. How do you tell Gary, who I love? Nobody cares about them. I was wrong again. Great to see you guys.
What year did you were you selling shoes out of your car?
76. And I'll tell you the truth. I put a little thing in my daughter's ear. I said, you know, the only way to beat Amazon is go back in the truck. So if you see me at a race, I think maybe I'm going to get one of my grandsons so at least he can run and make believe he's a decent runner.
Gary, you once, I love this, a couple of years ago, you referred to racing my father as being both voracious and kind.
Well, he never slowed down for anybody, let me tell you. But at that 30-mile and other races that we competed together, I could definitely see when we get to some place and I'd be starting to fail, I could always feel him grabbing me and saying, come on, man, you can do it.
You were young at that age to be running an ultra marathon. What prompted you to go an ultra so early?
I couldn't run the 200. The further I went, the longer I could stick with somebody. So, yeah, all those people that can run the 200, I admire you. Gary, I like this guy.
Any other life story or athletic story of my father that jumps out at you?
Oh, other stories. There were so many, I just didn't know where to start. He was my mentor. He told me that someday my posture had to be different, otherwise I'd have back problems. So I still have back problems today.
If you want to know my father and know the real person, Joe's got tremendous stories, and Joe, just talk a little about my father.
Well, I'd like to start by saying, Theodore Corbett was his name, a.k.a. Ted Corbett. To me, that says it all, because he just wanted to be a regular person. He didn't want to be Theodore Corbett. He wanted to be a.k.a. Ted Corbett. And I remember especially one day I was sitting in his office. He was my friend for 30 years. We were friends for 30 years. And we were just talking about different things. It was always about the human body, fitness and exercise. And I said to him, Ted, I pray a lot. I pray a lot. And he said, I'm a practicing Taoist. And I went, why a Taoist? And he went, I was trained as a scientist. He said, I was trained as a scientist. Why? as a trained scientist, I had to deal with facts and pure science and had to be proved. He said, you can't approach people with that. He said, human nature requires that you deal from the heart. He said, you have to have empathy, kindness, and care. He says, I don't want anybody ever to applaud me for being an athlete. I want them to applaud me for understanding this about human nature. He said, you can't be a watcher. You have to be involved, totally involved. He said, the greatest thing you can do with your life is to take another individual and raise him higher than you. This is Ted Corbett.
I was telling the audience that it really helps to visualize the race ahead of time. See yourself running through it, getting through all the parts of the race that you'll be successful at, and see yourself finishing successfully. And I guided the audience through that. And all the psychologists on the panel with me really put me down. This is impossible, this doesn't work, you don't know what you're talking about, it's stupid. Some years later, the head of that panel, the guy who organized it, came to New York and sought me out and said, I have to apologize. You were right, and we were wrong. Now we learned that that works. So, thank you. So to have Ted in my corner with me and compare notes with him was so wonderful. And we became brothers and spent a lot of time together. I was so honored that, Gary, that I was called from his deathbed and could help him move on. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity to help Ted move to the other side. And I brought this is from the New York Times when Ted was 74 years old. I have this on the wall in my office. I mean, I had it for 20 years. I love it. And I love Ted so much. So it's great to have it. And so, I can talk so much about what Ted meant to me and why we could work on a level that was important to him and to me together.
Well, thank you. My father had extraordinary success with healing people, and he was open to every approach. If I could ask him questions now, they would all be about his techniques in healing people and about spirituality. I might just have one question about athletics. My father frequented classes that Peter put on, and he was open to new approaches. He really was. He was all about studying. We talk about continuing education. That on the website, I have years and years of him taking classes. So, thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Gary.
Nina, this introduce Nina. Nina, stand up. We recognize that. We've got tremendous royalty in the room, and you've for so many in so many ways, what you've as an athlete and administrator of the sport behind the scenes was tremendous. Ultra marathoners in the audience, show of hands. Okay. London to Brighton runners. Yes. John Gold, stand up. 1962, I would have been 11 years old. The day before my father was going to his first London to Brighton, John's at the door with a shirt that he gave my father to run in that race. I can remember this like it was yesterday. And
I believe the AU, whoever it was, who we asked about getting the shirt, did not give it to us. So I had it made by my mother. I just like a little story. 1960, my first race, 4-miler on Sedgwick Avenue. The race is over, and I meet Nat Cyrillic, and he gets me into the Roadrunners Club for $2, and the long distance log for $3. And while we're talking and everybody's going on, all of a sudden it gets quiet, and I go, what the heck's going on? And there's Ted Corbett giving some information to the runners, and everybody just kept quiet because he was soft-spoken. That showed you what they thought about Ted. And this was when we maybe only had 40 or 50 guys at this point in time. And that's all, folks.
David Belkovich, please stand. Dave is, for years, and my father was alive to see this, and every January around his birthday, they run around Manhattan Island. And they would give him birthday cards.
And you did it.
I did it once myself. Yes. My father, Gordon McKenzie, did it in 1960, and that's a great story in itself. But Dave, I thank you. I mean, again, legacy and lineage. My father ran around Manhattan Island pretty regularly. You probably know the stories, and so that's a tremendous way to honor him. Rich, make your way. Over the years, my father has won a lot of prizes, and Gail and Laura Yasso took some of the medals and passed those on to various runners, ultra runners, and runners. And I've been wanting to do this for a long time because Rich, we talk about continuing a legacy. He's heading up the Broadway Ultra Society, is doing so much for the sport of ultramarathon running. And my father was considered the father of ultramarathon running, and he coined the term ultramarathon. And the sport really grew in New York. Aldo Scandura put on races and ultramarathon races, and Rich, I went to, my father ran London Brighton 5 times. 1965 race, in 1964 he lost by a minute. It's a 52.5-mile race. 1965 he took second 3 times. But 1965 I think was the year, if he could have did it again and he didn't get injured, he hurt his arch during the race, and he limped through part of the race, but he did recover. That was the year I think he could have won it. I think the 65 race, he had a strategy. Bernard Gomasol, who won it 3 times, around 35 miles he would put a surge on. So you had to make a decision whether you want to go with that or not. And my father's plan A was to go with him at all costs, or to counterattack and run him down. The arch was an issue for him, so he didn't go with him. But he did actually, after the Dale Hill, he did outrun him the final 4 or so miles that was downhill, and he was a good downhill runner. Rich, here's the 1965 second place flag for you. Richard and Laura, Broadway Ultra Society, thank you for the many ways you continue both my father's legacy and that of the sport of ultramarathon. I've also written out the diary entry that my father did back in '65. So.
Like I said, I'm like Joe. I knew the person as a person, not really as a legend. Like I said, I didn't even know that, I didn't know him when he was really a very good runner. This was like when he was after asthma. And concur with Vince said, Ted told me that 300 times he was stopped by the police for just being a black man running in the street. Okay. Now, if you're a Seinfeld fan, if you remember this, the episode where George had that big fat wallet where everything was in it, well, Ted had one of those wallets. We were at the Olympic trials in 2000 in Sacramento, and the session was like from 8 in the morning to noon, and Ted was training for the 6-day race. And so he was going to go out after this 12 o'clock to do a 30-mile walk in 95-degree heat. And there he is carrying his wallet. They said, Ted, leave that wallet home. I said, too much weight. No, I need this wallet. So then he tells me the story when he was doing his internship in Cleveland. What was it, Cleveland? Yeah. He had like an hour for lunch, and he was wearing these white sweatpants, and he ran to the sanitarium and had a cul-de-sac, and then he kind of ran back, and all of a sudden he was stopped because they thought he was an escapee from the sanitarium. So then about later, like in Yonkers, he was wearing, and they were white sweatpants, and then he wore these white sweatpants in Yonkers, and he got stopped by the police again, and I said to Ted, you gotta get rid of those white sweatpants. So, and then in conclusion, I used to take Ted to many different places, and we went to the Penn Relays, and we're coming back, and it's kind of raining, and I'm trying to look for the turn to the New Jersey Turnpike, and it was like 2 turns, and I took the wrong one, and I noticed the runaway, and I switched back and went back, and all of a sudden we were stopped by the police. So right away they're grilling me, and they said, where are you coming from? So we went to the Penn Relays in the rain, and they go, right, the Penn Relays in the rain. You think we believe that? And they're flashing their light right in Ted's face, and I was like really angry. But I remember all the civility that he always used, and I held my tongue, So then they let us go, and they said, yeah, they didn't believe that when we were going to the Penn Relays and it was in the rain, and Ted goes, yeah, I wouldn't believe that either. I said, Ted, you're going to be my material witness. Anyway, we shared a lot of great moments, and next week will be his 10th anniversary, and we don't need the day, we remember him always. Okay.
I'm going to write a book of letters, because he did all his letters in duplicate, so I have a tremendous collection, but he was training for the 52 Olympic Yonkers Marathon, and he was having problems with being stopped by the police up in Yonkers in Westchester County. He said those same policemen years later called him Mr. Corbett. So he went from a suspect to respect. That's some story.